After his passing, Les Paul's children unlocked his vault. They were astounded by what they saw. They wept because of the size of the fortune inside. $1 million patents, priceless guitars, and steady streams of royalties. However, that was only the start. This is the crazy tale of how a $5 contract became one of the largest fortunes in music, complete with family feuds and record-breaking auctions. On June 9, 1915, Les Paul was born Lester William Pulsfuss in Waukesha, Wisconsin. His ancestry was German. Evelyn, his mother, had ties to the Stutz automakers and the Milwaukee brewing sector. Young Lester spent hours gathering spare parts in the garage owned by his father, George. He was the type of youngster who saw potential in everything. Their wooden staircase turned into a test as well. He transformed the steps into a musical instrument by trimming them to alter their pitch. Although she wasn't happy about the damage, his mother referred to it as ingenious. Evelyn chose to abbreviate his parents' last name from Pulsfuss to Pulfuss following their divorce. During World War I, there was a lot of anti-German attitude, and she sought to ease the situation. Lester began using the name Les Paul later in life, but he never legally changed it. He began performing when he was 5 years old. At Rotary Club meetings, he sang while standing on tables. How will you manage to keep him on the farm? It was once said to his mother by a music teacher, "Your boy will never learn music." He was not deterred by that. He disassembled a harmonica at the age of 8 to learn how it operated. He then reassembled it and learned how to play on his own. He constructed his own radio at the age of 9. It didn't require power. Through an antenna he stretched between trees, it captured sound directly from the atmosphere. He wanted to play both guitar and harmonica simultaneously when he was 10 years old. So he created a harp holder that doesn't require his hands. He added wood bits, twisted a wire coat hanger, and made adjustments until it functioned. His brother brought extra hangers home from his job at the dry cleaners. Les transformed them into countless prototypes, testing and refining each one as he went along. At a drive-in restaurant in 1925, he was strumming a guitar when a member of the audience yelled, "Red, your guitar's not loud enough." He needed no more challenge than that. He took his mother's phone's mouthpiece and connected it to a radio speaker. To make his voice louder, he held the mouthpiece to a broomstick and shouted into it. Sufficient. He connected his guitar to the radio's amplifier and inserted a phonograph needle into the guitar's bridge. There was a lot of feedback and the sound was terrible, but for some reason it worked. At the age of 12, he had only begun the process of developing the electric guitar. Despite people's doubts, he persisted. By the age of 13, he began performing as Red Hot Red in roadhouses. He was making a solid living at the time playing music, and $5 a night was good money. He came up with 2 distinct stage names when he was 15. He put country music on the St. Louis radio while Rhubarb Red. He played jazz in Chicago clubs as Les Paul. Depending on the crowd, he alternated between the two. Constantly trying new things and trying new things. He quit school at the age of 17 to embark on a tour. Before joining Sonny Joe Wolverton's band, he played with Rube Tronson's Texas Cowboys. At Beekman's Barbecue, he had his big moment at home. A tin bucket sat next to him while he played guitar for tips. He earned $14 some nights, enough to purchase additional radio parts. He never thought of creation and music as 2 different things. They collaborated for him. Everything began to come together when Paul relocated to Chicago in 1934. He performed at the huge Chicago World's Fair, where he was in front of an audience he had never seen before. Simultaneously, he secured radio positions that would influence his destiny. Paul was in the center of the vibrant music scene in Chicago. He started presenting shows on WRJN in Racine and WBBM in Chicago with Sonny Joe Wolverton at his side. He played country music that appealed to Midwest rural audiences during the day as Rhubarb Red. But his entire world altered at night. He entered the jazz scene, trying out new forms and developing a fresh method of commanding an audience. There was more to these transitions between jazz and country than just performance. He was becoming more than just a musician because of them. He met some of the greatest musicians of all time while he was on the radio and in clubs in Chicago. He encountered a pianist named Art Tatum, whose fingers moved so quickly that they hardly looked human. Tatum taught Paul how to approach music in a way he had never thought of before by introducing him to intricate chords and improvisation. Then there was Django Reinhardt, a guitarist who performed with unparalleled skill after losing 2 fingers in a fire. Rather than viewing it as a constraint, Reinhardt developed a brand new style that was unheard of before. Paul listened, observed, and gained knowledge. He performed with these musicians in addition to admiring them. He performed with Chicago's top musicians night after night, absorbing ideas and methods that shaped his own sound. He was no longer merely a jazz or country musician. He was something fresh, something in between. Above all, though, he was discovering what it meant to be innovative. He had learned from Reinhardt and Tatum that being a good musician wasn't enough. It was about overcoming obstacles and doing things that others said were impossible. Paul demonstrated the extent to which Reinhardt had impacted him in 1953, years later. The music industry was shocked when Reinhardt passed away suddenly at the age of 43. Paul never forgot his influence or the lessons he had learned from him. Additionally, he contributed to the cost of Reinhardt's funeral in a covert act that very few people ever heard of. Paul simply wanted his guitar to be louder, he never intended to alter the song. Playing in large arenas was a popular strategy in the 1930s. That type of area was not intended for acoustic guitars. They were unable to break through the cacophony of a full band, even with pickups. He made every effort to rectify things. In an attempt to prevent undesired vibrations, he packed the body of his guitar with wood, rags, and even plaster of Paris. However, none of it was successful. The feedback persisted even if his instrument became heavier. He became desperate one night at a little Wisconsin club. In an attempt to enhance the sound, he connected a phonograph needle to his guitar. It was only a temporary solution. He required a practical answer. Then it dawned on him. The guitar itself was the issue, not just the amplifiers or pickups. He began to see it clearly by the late 1930s. The cause was the guitar's hollow body. It transformed the entire instrument into a noise echo chamber by amplifying every tiny vibration in addition to the melody. He needed to do rid of the hollow body completely if he desired pure, regulated sound. He constructed something that had never been seen before in 1941. He referred to it as the log. Just a 4x4 piece of wood with a guitar neck and pickups attached, as the name implies. He attached the sides of an old Epiphone hollow body to it using bolts to make it appear less odd. However, those were merely for display. The strong wood core held the true power. No more feedback or undesired vibrations, just pure, continuous sustain. Les Paul's choice to relocate to Los Angeles in 1943 would have a significant impact on the direction of music. Paul converted the garage of his Hollywood house into a creative place unlike anything that existed at the time after Bing Crosby encouraged him to set up a recording studio. It was more than just an equipment room. There, he experimented with the limits of sound. He constructed his own recording equipment, even turning a Cadillac flywheel into a makeshift lathe. He had a new goal in mind. It was something no one had ever heard. He experimented with overdubbing, sound-on-sound recording, and speed manipulation over the course of the following 2 years. He got closer to what he dubbed the new sound with each new discovery. His innovations and ability to make regular recordings feel larger, fuller, and more alive drew musicians to his studio. Paul sculpted music rather than merely playing it. He recorded one layer of sound using acetate discs, then added another while playing it back. He continued doing this until the music was just the way he wanted it to be. It wasn't simple. Before they were flawless, some tunes required hundreds of attempts. His song Lover stunned the business in 1948. He performed all 8 of the guitar layers on it. There had never been a sound like it. Columbia Records rejected it because they were unsure on what to do with it. However, Capitol Records recognized the potential, and the song became a smash upon its release. Making music was not the only thing Paul was doing in his garage. He was revolutionizing the creation of music. His methods served as the basis for multi-track recording, which would soon become the norm in the field. As a performer, he was creating his legacy as an innovator. It's been a long, long time with Bing Crosby, he recorded in 1945. After years apart, individuals were finally getting back together with their loved ones as the war came to an end. That emotion was nicely encapsulated in the song. Crosby's voice was enhanced by Paul's delicate yet warm guitar work, which added depth. Not only did the single top the Billboard charts upon its release, it remained there for weeks. Paul impressed Crosby not only as a musician but also as a trailblazer. He presented Paul with an Ampex Model 200, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, in 1948, which was among the first of its kind to be sold commercially. Paul disassembled it right away and rebuilt it, adding a spare playback head so he could record more than one track without wiping off the others. This was no ordinary experiment. It was a discovery that would forever alter music. Then catastrophe happened, just when everything appeared to be coming together. Paul was traveling through Oklahoma on January 13, 1948, when an ice storm turned the road into a sheet of glass. After skidding, his automobile crashed. His elbow and right arm were broken. The doctors informed him that they were forced to amputate. Paul declined, but there was no worse news for a guitarist. He persuaded the surgeons to position his arm at a permanent angle instead. One that would let him continue to play. There was no hesitation, even though it was a hard decision. His life revolved on music, and he had no intention of abandoning it. It took nearly a year to recover. Though unable to play, he was able to think. As he lay in a hospital bed, he sketched up new concepts to record. Multi-track approaches were already something he had been experimenting with, but now he had time to refine them in his imagination before putting them into practice. Afterward, there was Mary Ford. She possessed a voice that could elevate any melody, and she came from a musical family. Les Paul, a guitarist who was already gaining popularity, was introduced to her by country music performer Gene Autry in 1945. Les recognized her not only as a vocalist but also as a fantastic fit for his style of music. After they began collaborating, their relationship developed into something more. They got married in 1949. They had now fully merged their personal and professional lives. They rose to prominence as one of the biggest musical performers in the early 1950s. Charting successes. Via Con Dios and How High the Moon were among the songs that dominated the airwaves and were at the top of the charts for weeks at a time. They sold 6 million records in 1951 alone. At the time, they had a sound all their own. Les was more than just a guitar player. He worked with it, layered it, and made it sound nearly orchestral. Mary's voice was more than a tune. It was sculpted into something greater than any one person could ever sing live, multiplied, and harmonized with itself. Talent alone wasn't the key to their music. Technology was the cause. Les Paul was constantly striving to push the boundaries of what music might be through experimentation. He experimented with previously unheard of sound effects, overdubbing, and tape speed. He put up equipment in their home, converting hotel rooms and garages into temporary recording facilities rather than using large studios. Mary's voice took on a personal warmth as he positioned microphones near her mouth. In New Jersey, he carved an echo chamber into the granite of the mountain beneath their home. To make their music seem deeper, fuller, and more sophisticated than anything else on the radio, every little aspect was meticulously designed. Their impact extended beyond the studio. Together with Mary Ford and Les Paul at home, they introduced their music to television in 1953. 5 times a week, a 5-minute show was broadcast. Playing music in their own homes was more than just a performance, it was a glimpse into their life. Watching two people who were more than just partners on stage but also in life made the audience feel as though they were there with them. Long before it was given a name, it was among the first types of reality television. The Les Paul Virizer, however, was arguably the most astounding creation of Les Paul. He created a gadget that allowed him to play on stage and activate pre-recorded songs because he wanted to record their live performances. It gave the impression that a large band was playing. Despite the fact that they were alone. The audiences were in awe. The fact that they were listening to something other than live music was unknown to them. It combined cutting-edge technology with live music. A significant event occurred in the field of electric guitars in 1952. Les Paul, a musician and inventor who had been experimenting with guitar design for years, partnered with Gibson, one of the most reputable guitar makers. Les had already demonstrated that a guitar constructed from a single piece of wood might generate a more regulated and pure tone by building a solid body prototype that he named the Log. However, in order to realize its full potential, his proposal required the support of a large corporation. Gibson stepped in at that point. Gibson realized they needed a reaction at the time because Fender's Telecaster was becoming more and more popular. They proposed to Les Paul that a new guitar bearing his name be made in order to threaten Fender's hegemony. The original Gibson Les Paul model was created after months of development, with Les playing a major role in the design. Its carved maple top and strong mahogany body combined to create a warm, rich tone with remarkable sustain. Les recommended a gold finish since he thought it would make the instrument stand out. The outcome was the now famous gold top, a guitar that was as striking to look at as it was to play. Les Paul received the first two production models on May 20, 1952. He performed them live at the Paramount Theater in New York a month later, presenting Gibson's most recent work to the globe. At the Hotel Waldorf Astoria. This was more than a simple product launch. It was the start of something far more significant. Everywhere Les Paul and his wife, Mary Ford, performed, the guitar was seen and audible. Les was not merely supporting it. With each performance, he demonstrated its potential. This transaction was equally revolutionary in terms of finances. In addition to holding patent rights for several design features, such as the distinctive wrap-over bridge, Les Paul received royalties from each guitar sold. However, the original guitar model wasn't flawless in every way. Ted McCarty of Gibson created the original tailpiece, which made it challenging for players to bend strings with ease. It was frustrating to some. Gibson continued to refine the design over the ensuing years, eventually replacing the original bridge in 1955 with a more sophisticated tunematic system. This minor modification had a significant impact, enabling musicians to precisely modify their intonation. The Stratocaster was lighter, more reasonably priced, and had a slick, contemporary appearance despite its daring design and Les Paul's influence. A lot of guitarists thought the Les Paul was excessively heavy and archaic. Gibson decided to abandon the original single cutaway model in 1960 due to a significant decline in sales. They unveiled the SG, a new model with two cutaways and a smaller body. Les Paul didn't like the new design, so they first retained his name on it. By 1963, he requested that Gibson take his name from the model. As the original Les Paul was dying, an unforeseen event occurred. The Rolling Stones' Keith Richards began performing a Sunburst Les Paul standard on concert in 1964. Other guitarists noticed. Before long, Eric Clapton was utilizing one for his renowned bluesbreakers and John Mayall recordings. A rising number of rock and blues performers, including Mike Bloomfield, were enamored with the guitar's rich, powerful tone. When Gibson noticed the change, he took a risk. They brought back the original Les Paul design in 1968. It wasn't just another guitar this time. It represented the increasing influence of rock music. Legends like Slash, Pete Townshend, and Jimmy Page had solidified Les Paul's status in music history by the 1970s. Grew to be among the most precious instruments ever produced. What was originally regarded as a failure has become one of the most sought-after guitars of all time, with early examples from 1958 and 1960 fetching hundreds of thousands of dollars today. In the past, Mary Ford and Les Paul made the ideal musical duo. Together, they created magic on stage. Their marriage was failing off stage. Although they had been together since 1949, their relationship had become acrimonious and traumatic by the early 1960s. Les Paul filed for divorce in 1963. He said she had affairs with a number of men, including Donald Hatfield, a contractor, and singer Foy Willing. Additionally, he said that she openly boasted about her romances, humiliating him and neglecting their children. What began as a musical love tale turned into a scandal and heartache. Les Paul stopped performing after the divorce. His marriage was not the only thing that ended when he lost Mary Ford. His musical collaboration was over. And there was a void in her absence. He was also aware that the music business was evolving. It had become rock and roll. And it no longer revolved on his musical style. He focused on something he had always enjoyed instead of attempting to compete with the new generation of artists. Inventiveness. Music was never Les Paul's only passion. He was an innovator who was constantly looking for new ways to make music. He developed a tool known as the pulverizer during this period that allowed players to manipulate recorded sounds straight from their instruments. His studio efforts established the groundwork for recording methods that would influence contemporary music. He was transforming the industry in ways that most people were unaware of, despite the fact that he wasn't performing. However, his body was failing him while he was developing new technology. playing the guitar for years had worn it down. His fingers were difficult to move due to arthritis. Even listening to his favorite music was challenging due to his hearing loss. This would have been the end for many musicians. It was just another obstacle for Les Paul to overcome. He modified his playing to accommodate his constraints and discovered new methods that enabled him to continue creating music in his own unique style. He never really vanished, even though he avoided the stage for years. He recorded Chester and Lester and Guitar Monsters in 1976 and 1978 with the renowned guitarist Chet Atkins. The world was reminded of his greatness by these albums. He continued to demonstrate why he was one of the greatest musicians of all time despite not giving performances all the time. Then an unforeseen event occurred. Les Paul made the decision to resume performing live in the late 1980s. Most musicians had long since retired by the time he was in his 70s. Rather than slowing down, however, he began performing weekly at the Iridium Jazz Club in New York City in 1995. People flocked to the place every Monday night to see him perform. Celebrities, musicians, and fans flocked to witness the guy who had permanently altered music. He was awarded one of the greatest accolades in music in 1988. Alongside icons like Bob Dylan and the Beatles, he was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City served as the venue for the event. Was a memorable experience. He was honored to be inducted by one of the greatest guitarists of all time, Jeff Beck. Beck acknowledged something that many people already knew when he was on stage. Les Paul had taught him so much. Paul's influence had influenced his playing, his methods, and even his perspective on the guitar. It served as a reminder that Les Paul's influence went well beyond his own music and was a moment of unadulterated admiration. Nearly 20 years later, he demonstrated once more how influential he was, the recipient of 2 Grammys. The tracks on his album Les Paul and Friends, American-made World Played weren't the only thing on it. Collaborations with musicians like Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Keith Richards, and Sting were part of the celebration of his legacy. He took home the Grammys that evening for Best Rock Instrumental Performance for 69 Freedom Special and Best Pop Instrumental Performance for Caravan. The sight was amazing. A man who won significant accolades and influenced music decades ago, demonstrating the eternal nature of his sound. His fame extended beyond the realm of music. He was admitted to the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2005. He was recognized for both his technical brilliance and his artistic ability, placing him in a unique category. Everything altered as a result of his contributions to music technology. The Log, his early solid-body electric guitar prototype, served as the model for contemporary electric guitars, such as the well-known Gibson Les Paul. His contributions to multi-track recording revolutionized music production by enabling musicians to precisely layer various sounds. These weren't minor adjustments. Sector. Les Paul never stopped doing what he loved, even in his latter years. He played at the Iridium Jazz Club in New York once a week, entertaining the crowd with anecdotes while strumming his guitar. President George W. Bush recognized his contributions to music and culture in 2007 by awarding him the National Medal of Arts. His remarkable life was documented in documentaries such as Les Paul, Chasing Sound, which demonstrated how his inquisitiveness and tenacity had influenced a whole musical age. He was already etched in history when he died of pneumonia-related complications on August 12, 2009, at the age of 94. He was honored by musicians worldwide. He was energetic and full of good vibes, according to Slash. According to U2's Edge, without him, rock music as we know it wouldn't exist. Fans continue to pay tribute to him through installations like the Les Paul Experience in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where he was buried. When he died in 2009, however, his impact continued. Tens of millions were the value of his estate. Founded on a collection of rare instruments, groundbreaking patents, and guitar royalties. His legacy is still impacted by the combination of record-breaking auctions, family conflicts, and court cases that followed. Gibson was one of the main sources of his wealth. When the first Les Paul guitar was introduced in 1952, he had a contract that paid him $5 for each guitar sold. Although it may not seem like much, that amounts to about $60 per guitar when adjusted for current values. Gibson momentarily stopped the model in the 1960s, which complicated matters, but more than 1 million Les Paul guitars had been sold by the time of his death. Some of the most precious guitars ever made were vintage versions from the late 1950s. Even though a well-preserved 1959 burst might fetch over $400,000 today, guitars weren't the only source of Les Paul's income. His theories influenced the recording of music. Technologies that enable musicians to create hitherto unheard of sound layers. In addition to being influential, many concepts were patented, meaning that businesses had to pay to use them. These patents generated significant revenue for decades, albeit the precise figures are not available to the public. And then there were the guitars he owned. He had artifacts of music history in his personal collection. The Log was the most well-known. He constructed a prototype in 1941 that served as the basis for solid-body electric guitars. The most valuable, though? That was his Les Paul Gold Top from 1952. Les Paul used it on television throughout the 1950s, and it was his first production model. Expectations were shattered when it was eventually put up for sale. The expected sale price was $100,000. The purchase price was $930,000. The auction was only the first step. More than 150 objects from his estate were up for auction at Christie's in 2013, 4 years after his passing. Not only did it involve guitars, but it also included handwritten lyrics, early recording equipment, and experimental prototypes. The iconic Greenie 1959 Les Paul, which was formerly owned by Fleetwood's Max Peter Green before being purchased by Kirk Hammett of Metallica for $2 million, was one of the most talked about pieces. Collectors were prepared to spend everything to possess a piece of history, and each item had a tale to tell. Not everybody was content. The estate was run by his son, Gene, whose choices caused controversy. Historic guitars like the Gold Top, according to many, ought to have remained in the family or been shown in a museum. Gene justified the sales by claiming that his father did not want his legacy to be preserved. He desired for the world to see his work. The altercations continued after that. There were disagreements about how to deal with Gibson's royalties. A few relatives desired to reinvest. Others wanted the funds dispersed. When Gibson prevailed in a case against Heritage Guitars in 2021, securing its trademark over the Les Paul body shape, the matter grew even more complex. This resulted in an increase in revenue. It meant more arguments, too. The dispute over his recording patents followed. In order to transform them into a reliable source of income, some planned to aggressively license them. Others resisted, fearing it would damage his standing as a trailblazer.